Many fans were heartbroken for Daniel Ricciardo when it was announced that he and McLaren were to part ways by the end of the 2022 season. But recent reports have revealed that things aren't as bad as they first seemed. So what made the separation worthwhile for the Honey Badger? And what are his plans for the 2023 season as Red Bull's third driver? Well, let's talk about it. But before we do, consider subscribing to the channel so you don't miss out on our latest uploads. Now that's out of the way, let's get started. During the 2022 season's summer break, McLaren and Daniel made it official that both parties have decided to cut their contract short and part ways by the season's end. And with that comes repercussions for McLaren for cutting their contract with Daniel short. This came after two tumultuous seasons with McLaren that left both parties and their fans scratching their heads as to why things didn't pan out as everyone expected them to. And to add on to that, the team had decided to sign Oscar Piastri as Ricciardo's placement, which made the team offer Daniel a financial compensation to agree to the separation. At the height of the news, it was reported that Ricciardo would receive $21 million, but the media outlet Racing News 365 has confirmed that Ricciardo will be receiving $18 million, $3 million less than what was reported before. On the other side of the coin, the team's former team principal, Andreas Seidel, would say that handling Ricciardo's exit from the team was his hardest task as a part of McLaren. Professionally, it was definitely one of the toughest things I had to deal with in my motorsport career, Seidel said, as per GPFans.com. Having these open and honest discussions with a great driver and a great guy like Daniel was tough, especially then telling him openly and honestly about our decision that we wanted to split ways early. At the same time, I'm very, very happy that we both managed to do it in a way with this transparency and open dialogue we always had, that we could still finish a season together with great commitment from both sides to finish on a high. We still have a great relationship where we can still go for a dinner or a beer at night. That is very, very important for me because, in the end, it's about the human beings in this sport as well, despite all the complex technology. While Ricciardo has never come off as someone who seeks monetary gain, it wouldn't be too much of a stretch to say that the Honey Badger is glad to come out with something positive during his stay with McLaren. Former F1 executive Mark Gallagher would go on to say as much, saying that you can't feel too sorry for Daniel, seeing that he made a vast amount of money. If Formula One loses Daniel, if he does disappear from F1, I've no doubt he's going to have a big career elsewhere in motorsport, Gallagher said on the Flat Chat podcast. We shouldn't feel too sorry for him because he's made a vast amount of money out of Formula One. So from a purely financial perspective, he's had a very lucrative career, and that's been terrific. He will feel that he never quite achieved his potential, and that will be the one thing that he probably thinks about as he gets older. There were probably better things he could have done from a purely performance perspective in his career. Gallagher would also say that Daniel has made more money than what he could possibly have made if he stayed with Red Bull, and that his move now back to the Milton Keynes team is his way of simplifying things in a rather complex sport. It's been a very difficult experience at McLaren, Gallagher said. I read the details of his interviews several times because the more I read it, the more I felt, wow, Daniel is quite confused. On the one hand, he wants to go back to basics, but then on the other, he talks about the danger of overthinking. He slightly complains about the fact that he's surrounded by engineers who just talk data and complexity and try this and try that. He clearly isn't enjoying the complexity, and yet the sport is inherently complex. You have to be able to deal with that, which means that as a driver, you need to be able to communicate to the team in a way that they will listen, and the team has to be prepared to listen in order for the driver, as a human being, to get what he needs from the car. The car ultimately has to give him confidence. It's the difference between sitting in the car and being in the car, and it feels like Daniel's not really in the car because he doesn't feel at one with it. As someone who is seen as one of the best drivers on the grid during his days at Red Bull, many would expect Daniel to be full of regret, especially with how disappointing his past 2 seasons were with McLaren. But in a recent conversation on the Beyond the Grid podcast, the Honey Badger would say, "I don't look at it like that, because nothing is sure. If I stayed there the last 4 years, could I say I would have had more podiums than I've had? What have I had? Maybe 3 or something? Yeah, I'm confident to say I would have had more podiums than I've had, but you just don't know. Obviously, at the time, I felt like it was right for me. I felt like I needed a change, and I needed to kind of just remove myself a bit. If I continued at Red Bull, would that urge have grown? Would I have become, let's say, more curious, or less happy, or whatever? It's not a sure thing that it would have been great if I stayed. I don't look back and say, man, I should have left, but, of course, I can be honest with myself and say, yeah, I took a little bit of a gamble on myself. I still feel like the Renault move was pretty good, especially 2020. That was one of the best seasons I've driven in F1. To get the team back on the podium, I was very proud of that. But obviously the McLaren one, even with the win was a high, and I can't remove that. I can't ignore that. I can look and say, I tried as well with this one and it didn't quite work out. You live and you learn. But I don't look back with regret. I just say, okay, it was a challenge I took on and it didn't work out how I hoped. With his signing with Red Bull, many fans are hoping that Daniel's career isn't over and that someday everything will come full circle for him. A possibility Daniel has hinted he wouldn't mind being a part of. Going back to Red Bull, I think there is, of course, an element of me which is curious in terms of just jumping on the sim and seeing how I do, even just for myself, Ricciardo said on Formula One's Beyond the Grid podcast. It is a car that, of course, it's changed in the last 4 years, but a car that obviously I knew well and had a lot of success with. And now that Max and Sergio's relationship is fraught with controversy after what happened in Brazil this past season, and on top of that, Checo's contract will end after the 2024 season. So, even if Daniel is at peace with his decisions these past few years, the Honey Badger may get a shot at redemption and a storybook ending. But what do you think? Was Ricciardo's decision of leaving Red Bull justified? And where would you spend the $18 million if you were him? Let us know in the comments section below. And, as always, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't.